Chapter 27. The Story. "First, sir," said Caderousse, "you must make me a promise." "What is that?" inquired the abbé. "Why, if you ever make use of the details I am about to give you, that you will never let anyone know that it was I who supplied them, for the persons of whom I am about to talk are rich and powerful, and if they only laid the tips of their fingers on me, I should break to pieces like glass." "Make yourself easy, my friend," replied the abbé. "I am a priest, and confessions die in my breast. Recollect, our only desire is to carry out in a fitting manner the last wishes of our friend. Speak, then, without reserve, as without hatred. Tell the truth, the whole truth. I do not know, never may know, the persons of whom you are about to speak. Besides, I am an Italian, and not a Frenchman, and belong to God and not to man, and I shall shortly retire to my convent, which I have only quitted to fulfill the last wishes of a dying man." This positive assurance seemed to give Caderousse a little courage. "Well, then, under these circumstances," said Caderousse, I even believe I ought to undeceive you as to the friendship which poor Edmond thought so sincere and unquestionable." "Begin with this, father, if you please," said the abbé. "Edmond talked to me a great deal about the old man, for whom he had the deepest love." "The history is a sad one, sir," said Caderousse, shaking his head. "Perhaps you know all the earlier part of it." "Yes," answered the abbé. "Edmond related to me everything until the moment when he was arrested in a small cabaret close to Marseilles." "At La Réserve? Oh, yes, I can see it all before me this moment." "Was it not his betrothal feast?" "It was, and the feast that began so gaily had a very sorrowful ending. A police commissary, followed by 4 soldiers, entered, and Dante was arrested." "Yes, and up to this point I know all," said the priest. "Dante himself only knew that which personally concerned him, for he never beheld again the 5 persons I have named to you, or heard mention of any one of them." "Well, when Dante was arrested, Monsieur Morel hastened to obtain the particular, and they were very sad. The old man returned alone to his home, folded up his wedding suit with tears in his eyes, and paced up and down his chamber the whole day, and would not go to bed at all, for I was underneath him, and heard him walking the whole night. And for myself, I assure you, I could not sleep either, for the grief of the poor father gave me great uneasiness, and every step he took went to my heart as really as if his foot had pressed against my breast. The next day Mercédès came to implore the protection of Monsieur de Villefort. She did not obtain it, however, and went to visit the old man. When she saw him so miserable and heartbroken, having passed a sleepless night, and not touched food since the previous day, she wished him to go with her, that she might take care of him. But the old man would not consent. "No," was the old man's reply. "I will not leave this house, for my poor dear boy loves me better than anything in the world, and if he gets out of prison, he will come and see me the first thing. And what would he think of if I did not wait here for him?" I heard all this from the window, for I was anxious that Mercédès should persuade the old man to accompany her, for his footsteps over my head night and day did not leave me a moment's repose. "But did you not go upstairs and try to console the poor old man?" asked the abbé. "Ah, sir," replied Caderousse, "we cannot console those who will not be consoled, and he was one of these. Besides, I know not why, but he seemed to dislike seeing me. One night, however, I heard his sobs, and I could not resist my desire to go up to him. But when I reached his door, he was no longer weeping, but praying. I cannot now repeat to you, sir, all the eloquent words and imploring language he made use of. It was more than piety. It was more than grief. And I, who am no cantor and hate the Jesuits, said then to myself, "It is really well, and I am very glad that I have not any children, for if I were a father and felt such excessive grief as the old man does, and did not find in my memory or heart all he is now saying, I should throw myself into the sea at once, for I could not bear it." "Poor father," murmured the priest. "From day to day he lived on alone, and more solitary. Monsieur Morel and Mercedes came to see him, but his door was closed, and although I was certain he was at home, he would not make any answer. One day, when, contrary to his custom, he had admitted Mercedes, and the poor girl, in spite of her own grief and despair, endeavored to console him, he said to her, "Be assured, my dear daughter, he is dead, and instead of expecting him, it is he who is awaiting us. I am quite happy, for I am the oldest, and of course shall see him first." However well disposed a person may be, why, you see, we leave off after a time seeing persons who are in sorrow. They make one melancholy, and so at last old Dante was left all to himself, and I only saw from time to time strangers go up to him and come down again with some bundle they tried to hide. But I guessed what these bundles were, and what he sold by degrees, what he had to pay for his subsistence. At length the poor old fellow reached the end of all he had. He owed 3/4 rent, and they threatened to turn him out. He begged for another week, which was granted to him. I know this because the landlord came into my apartment when he left his. For the first 3 days I heard him walking about as usual, but on the 4th I heard nothing. I then resolved to go up to him at all risks. The door was closed, but I looked through the keyhole and saw him so pale and haggard that, believing him very ill, I went and told Monsieur Morel, and then ran on to Mercedes. They both came immediately, Monsieur Morel bringing a doctor, and the doctor said it was inflammation of the bowels and ordered him a limited diet. I was there too, and I never shall forget the old man's smile at his prescription. From that time he received all who came. He had an excuse for not eating any more. The doctor had put him on a diet." The abbé uttered a kind of groan. "The story interests you, does it not, sir?" inquired Caderousse. "Yes," replied the abbé, "it is very affecting." Mercedes came again, and she found him so altered that she was even more anxious than before to have him taken to her own home. This was Monsieur Morel's wish also, who would fain have conveyed the old man against his consent. But the old man resisted, and cried so that they were actually frightened. Mercedes remained, therefore, by his bedside, and Monsieur Morel went away, making a sign to the Catalan that he had left his purse on the chimney-piece. But availing himself of the doctor's order, the old man would not take any sustenance at length. After 9 days of despair and fasting, the old man died, cursing those who had caused his misery, and saying to Mercedes, "If you ever see my Edmond again, tell him I die blessing him." The abbé rose from his chair and made 2 turns round the chamber, and pressed his trembling hand against his parched throat. "And you believe he died?" "Of hunger, sir, of hunger," said Caderousse. "I am as certain of it as that we two are Christians." The abbé, with a shaking hand, seized a glass of water that was standing by him, half full, swallowed it at one gulp, and then resumed his seat, with red eyes and pale cheeks. "This was indeed a horrid event," he said, in a hoarse voice. "The more so, sir, as it was men's, and not God's doing." "Tell me of these men," said the abbé. "And remember, too," he added in an almost menacing tone, "you have promised to tell me everything. Tell me, therefore, who are these men who killed the son with despair, and the father with famine?" "Two men, jealous of him, sir, one from love, and the other from ambition, Fernand and Danglars." "How was this jealousy manifested? Speak on." "They denounced Edmond as a Bonapartist agent." "Which of the two denounced him? Which was the real delinquent?" "Both, sir. One with a letter, and the other put it in the post." "And where was this letter written?" "At La Réserve, the day before the betrothal feast." "'Twas so, then, 'twas so, then," murmured the abbé. "Oh, Faria, Faria, how well did you judge men and things!" "What did you please to say, sir?" asked Caderousse. "Nothing, nothing," replied the priest. "Go on." "It was Danglars who wrote the denunciation with his left hand, that his writing might not be recognized, and Fernand who put it in the post." "But," exclaimed the abbé suddenly, "you were there yourself." "I?" said Caderousse, astonished. "Who told you I was there?" The abbé saw he had overshot the mark, and he added quickly, "No one, but in order to have known everything so well, you must have been an eyewitness." "True, true," said Caderousse in a choking voice. I was there." "And did you not remonstrate against such infamy?" asked the abbé. "If not, you were an accomplice." "Sir," replied Caderousse, "they had made me drink to such an excess that I nearly lost all perception. I had only an indistinct understanding of what was passing around me. I said all that a man in such a state could say, but they both assured me that it was a jest they were carrying on, and perfectly harmless." Next day, sir, you must have seen plain enough what they had been doing, yet you said nothing, though you were present when Dante was arrested." "Yes, sir, I was there, and very anxious to speak, but Danglars restrained me." "If he should be really guilty," said he, "and did really put it in the island of Elba, if he is really charged with a letter for the Bonapartist committee at Paris, and if they find this letter upon him, those who have supported him will pass for his accomplice. I confess I had my fears in the state in which politics then were, and I held my tongue. It was cowardly, I confess, but it was not criminal." "I understand you allowed matters to take their course. That was all." "Yes, sir," answered Caderousse, "and remorse preys on me night and day. I often ask pardon of God, I swear to you, because this action, the only one with which I have seriously to reproach myself in all my life, is no doubt the cause of my abject condition. I am expiating a moment of selfishness, and so I always say to La Carconte, when she complains, 'Hold your tongue, woman, it is the will of God.'" And Caderousse bowed his head with every sign of real repentance. "Well, sir," said the abbé, "you have spoken unreservedly, and thus to accuse yourself is to deserve a pardon." "Unfortunately, Edmond is dead, and has not pardoned me." "He did not know," said the abbé. "But he knows it all now," interrupted Caderousse. "They say the dead know everything. There was a brief silence. The abbé rose and paced up and down pensively, and then resumed his seat. "You have 2 or 3 times mentioned a Monsieur Morel," he said. "Who was he?" "The owner of the Pharaon and patron of Dante." "And what part did he play in this sad drama?" inquired the abbé. "The part of an honest man, full of courage and real regard. 20 times he interceded for Edmond. When the emperor returned, he wrote, implored, threatened, and so energetically that on the second restoration he was persecuted as a Bonapartist. 10 times, as I told you, he came to see Dante's father and offered to receive him in his own house. And the night or 2 before his death, as I have already said, he left his purse on the mantelpiece with which they paid the old man's debts and buried him decently. And so Edmond's father died, as he had lived, without doing harm to anyone. I have the purse still by me, a large one made of red silk." "And," asked the abbé, "is Monsieur Morel still alive?" "Yes," replied Caderousse. "In that case," replied the abbé, "he should be rich, happy." Caderousse smiled bitterly. "Yes, happy as myself," said he. "What, Monsieur Morel unhappy?" exclaimed the abbé. "He is reduced almost to the last extremity. Nay, he is almost at the point of dishonor." "How?" "Yes," continued Caderousse, "so it is after 25 years of labor, after having acquired a most honorable name in the trade of Marseille. Monsieur Morel is utterly ruined. He has lost 5 ships in 2 years, has suffered by the bankruptcy of 3 large houses, and his only hope now is in that very Pharaon which poor Dante commanded, and which is expected from the Indies with a cargo of cochineal and indigo. If this ship founders like the others, he is a ruined man." "And has the unfortunate man wife or children?" inquired the abbé. "Yes, he has a wife, who through everything has behaved like an angel. He has a daughter, who was about to marry the man she loved, but whose family now will not allow him to wed the daughter of a ruined man. He has, besides, a son, a lieutenant in the army, and as you may suppose, all this, instead of lessening, only augments his sorrows. If he were alone in the world, you would blow out his brains, and there would be an end." "Horribile!" ejaculated the priest. "And it is thus heaven recompenses virtue, sir," added Caderousse. "You see, I who never did a bad action, but that I have told you of, am in destitution, with my poor wife dying of fever before my very eyes, and I unable to do anything in the world for her. I shall die of hunger as old Dante did, while Fernand and Danglars are rolling in wealth." "How is that?" "Because their deeds have brought them good fortune, while honest men have been reduced to misery." "What has become of Danglars, the instigator and therefore the most guilty?" "What has become of him? Why, he left Marseille and was taken on the recommendation of Monsieur Morel, who did not know his crime, as cashier into a Spanish bank. During the war with Spain, he was employed in the commissariat of the French army, and made a fortune. Then with that money he speculated in the funds, and trebled or quadrupled his capital. And having first married his banker's daughter, who left him a widower, he has married a second time, a widow, a Madame de Nargonne, daughter of Monsieur de Servieux, the king's chamberlain, who is in high favor at court. He is a millionaire, and they have made him a baron, and now he is the Baron Danglars, with a fine residence on the Rue de Mont Blanc, with 10 horses in his stables, 6 footmen in his antechamber, and I know not how many millions in his strong-box." "Ah," said the abbé in a peculiar tone, "he is happy." "Happy? Who can answer for that? Happiness or unhappiness is the secret known but to oneself and the walls. Walls have ears, but no tongue. But if a large fortune produces happiness, Danglars is happy. And Fernand? Fernand? Why, much the same story. But how could a poor Catalan fisher boy, without education or resources, make a fortune? I confess this staggers me. And it has staggered everybody. There must have been in his life some strange secret that no one knows. But then, by what visible steps has he attained his high fortune or high position? Both, sir. He has both fortune and position, both. This must be impossible. It would seem so, but listen, and you will understand. Some days before the return of the Emperor, Fernand was drafted. The Bourbons left him quietly enough at the Catalans, but Napoleon returned. A special levy was made, and Fernand was compelled to join. I went too, but as I was older than Fernand and had just married my poor wife, I was only sent to the coast. Fernand was enrolled in the active troop, went to the frontier with his regiment, and was at the Battle of Ligny. The night after that battle he was sentry at the door of a general who carried on a secret correspondence with the enemy. That same night the general was to go over to the English. He proposed to Fernand to accompany him. Fernand agreed to do so, deserted his post, and followed the general. Fernand would have been court-martialed if Napoleon had remained on the throne, but his action was rewarded by the Bourbons. He returned to France with the epaulette of sub-lieutenant, and as the protection of the general, who is in the highest favour, was accorded to him. He was a captain in 1823, during the Spanish War. That is to say, at the time when Danglars made his early speculations. Fernand was a Spaniard, and being sent to Spain to ascertain the feeling of his fellow countrymen, found Danglars there, got on very intimate terms with him, won over the support of the royalists at the capital, and in the provinces received promises and made pledges on his own part, guided his regiment by paths known to himself alone through the mountain gorges which were held by the royalists, and in fact rendered such service in this brief campaign that after taking of Trocadero he was made colonel and received the title of count and the cross of an officer of the Legion of Honor. Destiny, destiny, murmured the abbe. Yes, but listen, this was not all. The war with Spain being ended, Fernand's career was checked by the long peace, which seemed likely to endure throughout Europe. Greece only had risen against Turkey, and had begun her war of independence. All eyes were turned towards Athens. It was the fashion to pity and support the Greeks. The French government, without protecting them openly, as you know, gave countenance to volunteer assistance. Fernand sought and obtained leave to go and serve in Greece, still having his name kept on the army roll. Some time after, it was stated that the Comte de Morcerf, this was the name he bore, had entered the service of Ali Pasha with the rank of Instructor General. Ali Pasha was killed, as you know, but before he died, he recompensed the service of Fernand by leaving him a considerable sum, with which he returned to France when he was gazetted Lieutenant General. So that now, inquired the abbe, so that now, continued Caderousse, he owns a magnificent house, numero 27, Rue du Helder, Paris. The abbe opened his mouth, hesitated for a moment, then, making an effort at self-control, he said, "And Mercedes? They tell me that she has disappeared." "Disappeared?" said Caderousse. "Yes, as the sun disappears, to rise the next day with still more splendor." "Has she made a fortune also?" inquired the abbe with an ironical smile. "Mercedes is at this moment one of the greatest ladies in Paris," replied Caderousse. "Go on," said the abbe. It seems as if I were listening to the story of a dream, but I have seen things so extraordinary that what you tell me seems less astonishing than it otherwise might." Mercedes was at first in the deepest despair at the blow which deprived her of Edmond. I have told you of her attempts to propitiate Monsieur de Villefort, her devotion to the elder Dante. In the midst of her despair, a new affliction overtook her. This was the departure of Fernand whose crime she did not know and whom she regarded as her brother. Fernand went, and Mercedes remained alone. 3 months passed, and still she wept. No news of Edmond, no news of Fernand, no companionship save that of an old man who was dying with despair. One evening, after a day of accustomed vigil at the angle of 2 roads leading to Marseille from the Catalans, she returned to her home more depressed than ever. Suddenly, she heard a step she knew, turned anxiously around. The door opened, and Fernand, dressed in the uniform of a sub-lieutenant, stood before her. It was not the one she wished for most, but it seemed as if a part of her past had returned to her. Mercedes seized Fernand's hands with a transport which he took for love, but which was only joy at being no longer alone in the world, and seeing at last a friend, after long hours of solitary sorrow. And then, it must be confessed, Fernand had never been hated. He was only not precisely loved. Another possessed all Mercedes' heart. That other was absent, had disappeared, perhaps was dead. At this last thought, Mercedes burst into a flood of tears, and wrung her hands in agony. But the thought, which she had always repelled before when it was suggested to her by another, came now in full force upon her mind. And then, too, old Dante incessantly said to her, "Our Edmond is dead. If he were not, he would return to us." The old man died, as I have told you. Had he lived, Mercedes perchance had not become the wife of another, for he would have been there to reproach her infidelity. Fernand saw this, and when he learned of the old man's death, he returned. He was now a lieutenant. At his first coming, he had not said a word of love to Mercedes. At the second, he reminded her that he loved her. Mercedes begged for 6 months more in which to await and mourn for Edmond. "So that," said the abbé with a bitter smile, "that makes 18 months in all. What more could the most devoted lover desire?" Then he murmured the words of the English poet, "Frailty, the name is woman." 6 months afterwards, continued Caderousse, the marriage took place in the church of Accoules. "The very church in which she was to have married Edmond," murmured the priest. "There was only a change of bridegrooms." "Well, Mercedes was married," proceeded Caderousse. "But although in the eyes of the world she appeared calm, she nearly fainted as she passed La Réserve, where 18 months before the betrothal had been celebrated with him whom she might have known she still loved, had she looked to the bottom of her heart. Fernand, more happy but not more at his ease, for I saw at this time he was in constant dread of Edmond's return. Fernand was very anxious to get his wife away, and to depart himself. There were too many unpleasant possibilities associated with the Catalans, and 8 days after the wedding they left Marseille. "Did you ever see Mercedes again?" inquired the priest. "Yes, during the Spanish War at Perpignan, where Fernand had left her. She was attending to the education of her son." The abbé started. "Her son?" said he. "Yes," replied Caderousse, "little Albert." "But then, to be able to instruct her child," continued the abbé, "she must have received an education herself." I understood from Edmond that she was the daughter of a simple fisherman, beautiful but uneducated." "Oh," replied Caderousse, "did he know so little of this lovely betrothed? Mercédès might have been a queen, sir, if the crown were to be placed on the heads of the loveliest and most intelligent. Fernand's fortune was already waxing great, and she developed with his growing fortune. She learned drawing, music, everything. Besides, I believe, between ourselves, she did this in order to distract her mind, that she might forget, and she only filled her head in order to alleviate the weight on her heart. But now her position in life is assured," continued Caderousse. "No doubt fortune and honours have comforted her. She is rich, a countess, and yet—" Caderousse paused. "And yet what?" asked the abbé. "Yet I am sure she is not happy," said Caderousse. "What makes you believe this?" "Why, when I found myself utterly destitute, I thought my old friends would perhaps assist me. So I went to Danglars, who would not even receive me. I called on Fernand, who sent me 100 francs by his valet de chambre." "Then you did not see either of them?" "No, but Madame de Morcerf saw me." "How was that?" "As I went away, a purse fell at my feet. It contained 25 louis. I raised my head quickly and saw Mercédès, who at once shut the blind." "And Monsieur de Villefort?" asked the abbé. "Oh, he never was a friend of mine. I did not know him, and I had nothing to ask of him." "Do you not know what became of him, and the share he had in Edmond's misfortunes?" "No, I only know that some time after Edmond's arrest, he married Mademoiselle de Saint-Méran, and soon after left Marseille. No doubt he has been as lucky as the rest. No doubt he is as rich as Danglars, as high in station as Fernand. I only, as you see, have remained poor, wretched, and forgotten." "You are mistaken, my friend," replied the abbé. "God may seem sometimes to forget for a time, while his justice reposes. But there always comes a moment when he remembers, and behold, a proof." As he spoke, the abbé took the diamond from his pocket, and giving it to Caderousse, said, "Here, my friend, take this diamond. It is yours." "What? For me only?" cried Caderousse. "Sir, do not jest with me." "This diamond was to have been shared among his friends. Edmond had one friend only, and thus it cannot be divided. Take the diamond, then, and sell it. It is worth 50,000 francs, and I repeat my wish that this sum may suffice to release you from your wretchedness." "Oh, sir," said Caderousse, putting out one hand timidly, and with the other wiping away the perspiration which bedewed his brow. "Oh, sir, do not make a jest of the happiness or despair of a man." "I know what happiness and what despair are, and I never make a jest of such feelings. Take it, then. But in exchange—" Caderousse, who touched the diamond, withdrew his hand. The abbé smiled. "In exchange," he continued, "give me the red silk purse that Monsieur Morel left on old Dante's chimney-piece, and which you tell me is still in your hands." Caderousse, more and more astonished, went toward a large oaken cupboard, opened it, and gave the abbé a long purse of faded red silk, round which were 2 copper runners that had once been gilt. The abbé took it, and in return gave Caderousse the diamond. "Oh, you are a man of God, sir," cried Caderousse, "for no one knew that Edmond had given you his diamond, and you might have kept it." "Which," said the abbé to himself, "you would have done." The abbé rose, took his hat and gloves. "Well," he said, All you have told me is perfectly true, then, and I may believe it in every particular. See, sir, replied Caderousse, in this corner is a crucifix in holy wood. Here on this shelf is my wife's testament. Open this book, and I will swear upon it with my hand on the crucifix. I will swear to you by my soul's salvation, my faith as a Christian. I have told everything to you as it occurred, and as the recording angel will tell it to the ear of God at the day of the last judgment. "'Tis well," said the abbé, convinced by his manner and tone that Caderousse spoke the truth. "'Tis well, and may this money profit you. Adieu. I go far from men who thus so bitterly injure each other." The abbé with difficulty got away from the enthusiastic thanks of Caderousse, opened the door himself, got out, and mounted his horse, once more saluted the innkeeper, who kept uttering his loud farewells, and then returned by the road he had travelled in coming. When Caderousse turned around, he saw behind him La Carconte, paler and trembling more than ever. "Is then all that I have heard really true?" she inquired. "What? That he has given the diamond to us only?" inquired Caderousse, half bewildered with joy. "Yes, nothing more true. See, here it is." The woman gazed at it a moment and then said in a gloomy voice, "Suppose it's false?" Caderousse started and turned pale. "False?" he muttered. "False? Why should that man give me a false diamond?" "To get your secret without paying for it, you blockhead!" Caderousse remained for a moment aghast under the weight of such an idea. "Oh," he said, taking up his hat, which he placed on the red handkerchief tied around his head, "we will soon find out." "In what way?" "Why, the fair is on at Beaucaire. There are always jewellers from Paris there, and I will show it to them. Look after the house, wife, and I shall be back in 2 hours." And Caderousse left the house in haste, and ran rapidly in the direction opposite to that which the priest had taken. 50,000 francs, muttered La Carconte, when left alone. "It is a large sum of money, but it is not a fortune." End of chapter 27. Chapter 28. The Prison Register. The day after that in which the scene we have just described had taken place, on the road between Bellegarde and Beaucaire, a man of about 30 or 32, dressed in a bright blue frock-coat, nankeen trousers, and a white waistcoat, having the appearance and accent of an Englishman, presented himself before the mayor of Marseille. "Sir," said he, "I am chief clerk of the house of Thomson and French, of Rome. We are, and have been these 10 years, connected with the house of Morel and Son, of Marseille. We have 100,000 francs, or thereabouts, loaned on their securities, and we are a little uneasy at reports that have reached us, that the firm is on the brink of ruin. I have come, therefore, express from Rome, to ask you for information." "Sir," replied the mayor, "I know very well that during the last 4 or 5 years misfortune has seemed to pursue Monsieur Morel. He has lost 4 or 5 vessels and suffered by 3 or 4 bankruptcies. But it is not for me, although I am a creditor myself, to the amount of 10,000 francs, to give any information as to the state of his finances. Ask of me as mayor what is my opinion of Monsieur Morel, and I shall say that he is a man honourable to the last degree, and who has up to this time fulfilled every engagement with scrupulous punctuality. This is all I can say, sir. If you wish to learn more, address yourself to Monsieur de Beauville, the inspector of prisons, number 15, Rue de Noailles. He has, I believe, 200,000 francs in Morel's hands, and if there be any grounds for apprehension, as this is a greater amount than mine, you will most probably find him better informed than myself." The Englishman seemed to appreciate this extreme delicacy, made his bow and went away, proceeding with a characteristic British stride towards the street mentioned. Monsieur de Beauville was in his private room, and the Englishman, on perceiving him, made a gesture of surprise which seemed to indicate that it was not the first time he had been in his presence. As to Monsieur de Beauville, he was in such a state of despair that it was evident all the faculties of his mind, absorbed in the thought which occupied him at the moment, did not allow either his memory or his imagination to stray to the past. The Englishman, with the coolness of his nation, addressed him in terms nearly similar to those with which he had accosted the mayor of Marseille. "Oh, sir," exclaimed Monsieur de Beauville, "your fears are unfortunately but too well founded, and you see before you a man in despair. I had 200,000 francs placed in the hands of Morel and Son. These 200,000 francs were the dowry of my daughter, who was to be married in a fortnight. And these 200,000 francs were payable, half on the 15th of this month, and the other half on the 15th of next month. I had informed Monsieur Morel of my desire to have these payments punctually, and he has been here within the last half hour to tell me that if his ship, the Pharaon, did not come into port on the 15th, he would be wholly unable to make this payment." "But," said the Englishman, "this looks very much like a suspension of payment." "It looks more like bankruptcy," exclaimed Monsieur de Beauville despairingly. The Englishman appeared to reflect a moment, and then said, "From which it would appear, sir, that this credit inspires you with considerable apprehension." "To tell you the truth, I consider it lost." "Well, then, I will buy it of you." "You?" "Yes, I. But at a tremendous discount, of course." "No, for 200,000 francs. Our house," added the Englishman with a laugh, "does not do things in that way." "And you will pay?" "Ready money." And the Englishman drew from his pocket a bundle of banknotes which might have been twice the sum Monsieur de Beauville feared to lose. A ray of joy passed across Monsieur de Beauville's countenance, yet he made an effort at self-control and said, "Sir, I ought to tell you that in all probability you will not realize 6% of this sum." "That's no affair of mine," replied the Englishman. "That is the affair of the house of Thomson and French, in whose name I act. They have, perhaps, some motive to serve in hastening the ruin of a rival firm. But all I know, sir, is that I am ready to hand you over this sum in exchange for your assignment of the debt. I only ask a brokerage." "Of course, that is perfectly just," cried Monsieur de Beauville. "The commission is usually 1½ Will you have 2, 3, 5%, or even more? Whatever you say." "Sir," replied the Englishman, laughing, "I am like my house, and do not do such things. No, the commission I ask is quite different." "Name it, sir, I beg." "You are the inspector of prisons." "I have been so these 14 years." "You keep the registers of entries and departures." "I do." "To these registers there are added notes relative to the prisoners." "There are special reports on every prisoner." "Well, sir, I was educated at home by a poor devil of an abbé, who disappeared suddenly. I have since learned that he was confined in the Château d'If, and I should like to learn some particulars of his death." "What was his name?" "The Abbé Faria." "Oh, I recollect him perfectly," cried Monsieur de Beauville. "He was crazy." "So they said." "Oh, he was decidedly." "Very possibly. But what sort of madness was it?" "He pretended to know of an immense treasure, and offered vast sums to the government if they would liberate him." "Poor devil! And he is dead?" "Yes, sir, 5 or 6 months ago, last February." "You have a good memory, sir, to recollect dates so well." "I recollect this because the poor devil's death was accompanied by a singular incident." May I ask what that was?" said the Englishman with an expression of curiosity, which a close observer would have been astonished at discovering in his phlegmatic countenance. "Oh, dear sir, yes, the abbé's dungeon was 40 or 50 feet distant from that of one of Bonaparte's emissaries, one of those who had contributed the most to the return of the usurper in 1815, a very resolute and very dangerous man." "Indeed," said the Englishman. "Yes," replied M. de Beauville. "I myself had occasion to see this man in 1816 or 1817, and we could only go into his dungeon with a file of soldiers. That man made a deep impression on me. I shall never forget his countenance." The Englishman smiled imperceptibly. "And you say, sir," he interposed, "that the two dungeons were separated by a distance of 50 feet. But it appears that this Edmond Dantès, this dangerous man's name was Edmond Dantès. It appears, sir, that this Edmond Dantès had procured tools or made them, for they found a tunnel through which the prisoners held communication with one another. This tunnel was dug, no doubt, with an intention of escape." "No doubt, but unfortunately for the prisoners, the Abbé Faria had an attack of catalepsy and died." "That must have cut short the projects of escape." "For the dead man, yes," replied M. de Beauville, "but not for the survivor. On the contrary, this Dantès saw a means of accelerating his escape. He no doubt thought that prisoners had died in the Château d'If were interred in an ordinary burial ground, and he conveyed the dead man into his own cell, took his place in the sack in which they had sewed up the corpse, and awaited the moment of interment." "It was a bold step, and one that showed some courage," remarked the Englishman. "As I have already told you, sir, he was a very dangerous man, and, fortunately, by his own act disembarrassed the government of the fears it had on his account." "How was that?" "How? Do you not comprehend?" "No." "The Château d'If has no cemetery, and they simply threw the dead into the sea, after fastening a 36-pound cannon-ball to their feet." "Well," observed the Englishman as if he were slow of comprehension. "Well, they fastened a 36-pound ball to his feet, and threw him into the sea." "Really?" exclaimed the Englishman. "Yes, sir," continued the inspector of prisons. "You may imagine the amazement of the fugitive when he found himself flung headlong over the rocks. I should like to have seen his face at that moment." "That would have been difficult." "No matter," replied de Beauville, in supreme good humour at the certainty of recovering his 200,000 francs. "No matter. I can fancy it." And he shouted with laughter. "So can I," said the Englishman, and he laughed too, but he laughed as the English do, at the end of his teeth. "And so," continued the Englishman, who first gained his composure, "he was drowned?" "Unquestionably." "So that the governor got rid of the dangerous and the crazy prisoner at the same time?" "Precisely." "But some official document was drawn up to this affair, I suppose?" inquired the Englishman. "Yes, yes, the mortuary deposition. You understand that Dante's relations, if he had any, might have some interest in knowing if he were dead or alive. So that now if there was anything to inherit from him, they may do so with easy conscience. He is dead, and no mistake about it." "Oh yes, and they may have the fact attested whenever they please." "So be it," said the Englishman. "But to return to these registers. True, this story has diverted our attention from them. Excuse me." "Excuse you for what? For the story? By no means. It really seems to me very curious." "Yes, indeed, so, sir. You wish to see all relating to the poor abbé, who really was gentleness itself?" "Yes, you will much oblige me." "Go into my study here, and I will show it to you." And they both entered M. de Beauville's study. Everything was here arranged in perfect order. Each register had its number, each file of papers its place. The inspector begged the Englishman to seat himself in an armchair, and placed before him the register and documents relative to the Château d'If, giving him all the time he desired for the examination, while de Beauville seated himself in a corner and began to read his newspaper. The Englishman easily found the entries relative to the Abbé Faria, but it seemed that the history which the inspector had related interested him greatly, for after having perused the first documents, he turned over the leaves until he reached the deposition respecting Edmond Dantès. There he found everything arranged in due order: the accusation, examination, Morel's petition, M. de Villefort's marginal notes. He folded up the accusation quietly, and put it as quietly in his pocket, read the examination and saw that the name of Noirtier was not mentioned in it, perused too the application dated 10th April 1815, in which Morel, by the deputy procureur's advice, exaggerated with the best intentions, for Napoleon was then on the throne, the services Dantès had rendered to the imperial cause, services which Villefort's certificates rendered indispensable. Then he saw through the whole thing. This petition to Napoleon, kept back by Villefort, had become, under the second Restoration, a terrible weapon against him in the hands of the king's attorney. He was no longer astonished when he searched on to find in the register this note, placed in a bracket against his name: Edmond Dantès, an inveterate Bonapartist, took an active part in the return from the island of Elba, to be kept in strict solitary confinement, and to be closely watched and guarded. Beneath these lines was written in another hand, "See note above, nothing can be done." He compared the writing in the bracket with the writing of the certificate placed beneath Morel's petition, and discovered that the note in the bracket was the same writing as the certificate. That is to say, was in Villefort's handwriting. As to the note which accompanied this, the Englishman understood that it might have been added by some inspector who had taken a momentary interest in Dantès' situation, but who had, from the remarks we have quoted, found it impossible to give any effect to the interest he had felt. As we have said, the inspector, from discretion, and that he might not disturb the Abbé Faria's pupil in his researches, had seated himself in a corner, and was reading Le Drapeau Blanc. He did not see the Englishman fold up and place in his pocket the accusation written by Danglars under the arbour of La Réserve, and which had the postmark Marseille, 27th February, delivery 6 o'clock p.m. But it must be said that if he had seen it, he attached so little importance to this scrap of paper, and so much importance to his 200,000 francs, that he would not have opposed whatever the Englishman might do, however irregular it might be. "Thanks," said the latter, closing the register with a slam. "I have all I want. Now it is for me to perform my promise. Give me a simple assignment of your debt. Acknowledge therein the receipt of the cash, and I will hand you over the money." He rose, gave his seat to M. de Beauville, who took it without ceremony, and quickly drew up the required assignment, while the Englishman counted out the banknotes on the other side of the desk. End of chapter 28. Chapter 29. The House of Morel and Son. Anyone who had quitted Marseille a few years previously, well acquainted with the interior of Morel's warehouse, and had returned at this date, would have found a great change. Instead of that air of life, of comfort, and of happiness that permeates a flourishing and prosperous business establishment, instead of merry faces at the windows, busy clerks hurrying to and fro in the long corridors, instead of the court filled with bales of goods, re-echoing with the cries and the jokes of porters, one would have immediately perceived all aspect of sadness and gloom. Out of all the numerous clerks that used to fill the deserted corridor and the empty office, but two remained. One was a young man of 23 or 24 who was in love with M. Morel's daughter, and had remained with him in spite of the efforts of his friends to induce him to withdraw. The other was an old one-eyed cashier called Coquelin, or Cockeye, a nickname given him by the young men who used to throng this vast, now almost deserted beehive, and which had so completely replaced his real name that he would not in all probability have replied to anyone who addressed him by it. Coquelin remained in M. Morel's service, and a most singular change had taken place in his position. He had at the same time risen to the rank of cashier, and sunk to the rank of a servant. He was, however, the same Coquelin, good, patient, devoted, but inflexible on the subject of arithmetic, the only point in which he would have stood firm against the world, even against M. Morel, and strong in the multiplication table which he had at his fingers' ends, no matter what scheme or what trap was laid to catch him. In the midst of the disasters that befell the house, Coquelin was the only one unmoved. But this did not arise from a want of affection, on the contrary, from a firm conviction. Like the rats that one by one forsake the doomed ship even before the vessel weighs anchor, so all the numerous clerks had by degrees deserted the office and the warehouse. Coquelin had seen them go without thinking of inquiring the cause of their departure. Everything was, as we have said, a question of arithmetic to Coquelin, and during 20 years he had always seen all payments made with such exactitude that it seemed as impossible to him that the house should stop payment as it would to a miller that the river that had so long turned his mill should cease to flow. Nothing had as yet occurred to shake Coquelin's belief. The last month's payment had been made with the most scrupulous exactitude. Coquelin had detected an overbalance of 14 sous in his cash, and the same evening he had brought them to M. Morel, who, with a melancholy smile, threw them into an almost empty drawer, saying, "Thanks, Coquelin. You are the pearl of cashier." Coquelin went away perfectly happy, for this eulogium of M. Morel himself, the pearl of the honest men of Marseille, flattered him more than a present of 50 crowns. But since the end of the month, M. Morel had passed many an anxious hour. In order to meet the payments then due, he had collected all his resources, and, fearing lest the report of his distress should get bruited abroad at Marseille when he was known to be reduced to such an extremity, he went to the Beaucaire fair to sell his wife's and daughter's jewels and a portion of his plate. By this means the end of the month was past, but his resources were now exhausted. Credit, owing to the reports afloat, was no longer to be had, and to meet the 100,000 francs due on the 10th of the present month, and the 100,000 francs due on the 15th of the next month to M. de Beauville, M. Morel had in reality no hope but the return of the Pharaon, of whose departure he had learned from a vessel which had weighed anchor at the same time, and which had already arrived in harbour. But this vessel, which, like the Pharaon, came from Calcutta, had been in for a fortnight, while no intelligence had been received of the Pharaon. Such was the state of affairs, when the day after his interview with M. de Beauville, the confidential clerk of the house of Thomson and French of Rome presented himself at M. Morel's. Emmanuel received him. This young man was alarmed by the appearance of every new face, for every new face might be that of a new creditor, come in anxiety to question the head of the house. The young man, wishing to spare his employer the pain of this interview, questioned the newcomer, but the stranger declared that he had nothing to say to M. Emmanuel, and that his business was with M. Morel in person. Emmanuel sighed, and summoned Coquelin. Coquelin appeared, and the young man bade him conduct the stranger to M. Morel's apartment. Coquelin went first, and the stranger followed him. On the staircase they met a beautiful girl of 16 or 17, who looked with anxiety at the stranger. "M. Morel is in his room, is he not, Mademoiselle Julie?" said the cashier. "Yes, I think so, at least," said the young girl hesitatingly. "Go and see, Coquelin, and if my father is there, announce this gentleman." "It will be useless to announce me, mademoiselle," returned the Englishman. "M. Morel does not know my name, This worthy gentleman has only to announce the confidential clerk of the house of Thomson and French of Rome, with whom your father does business." The young girl turned pale and continued to descend while the stranger and Coquelin continued to mount the staircase. She entered the office where Emmanuel was, while Coquelin, by the aid of a key he possessed, opened a door in the corner of a landing place on the second staircase, conducted the stranger into an antechamber, opened a second door, which he closed behind him, and after having left the clerk of the house of Thomson and French alone, returned and signed to him that he could enter. The Englishman entered and found Morel seated at a table, turning over the formidable columns of his ledger, which contained a list of his liabilities. At the sight of the stranger, M. Morel closed the ledger, arose and offered a seat to the stranger, and when he had seen him seated, resumed his own chair. 14 years had changed the worthy merchant, who in his 36th year, at the opening of this history, was now in his 50th. His hair turned white, time and sorrow had ploughed deep furrows in his brow, and his look, once so firm and penetrating, was now irresolute and wandering, as if he feared being forced to fix his attention on some particular thought or person. The Englishman looked at him with an air of curiosity, evidently mingled with interest. "Monsieur," said Morel, whose uneasiness was increased by this examination, "you wish to speak to me?" "Yes, monsieur. You are aware from whom I come." "The house of Thomson and French, at least, so my cashier tells me." "He has told you rightly. The house of Thomson and French had 300,000 or 400,000 francs to pay this month in France, and knowing your strict punctuality, have collected all the bills bearing your signature, and charged me as they became due to present them, and to employ the money otherwise." Morel sighed deeply, and passed his hand over his forehead, which was covered with perspiration. "So then, sir," said Morel, "you hold bills of mine?" "Yes, and for a considerable sum." "What is the amount?" asked Morel with a voice he strove to render firm. "Here is," said the Englishman, taking a quantity of papers from his pocket, "an assignment of 200,000 francs to our house by a Monsieur de Beauville, the inspector of prisons, to whom they are due. You acknowledge, of course, that you owe this sum to him." "Yes. He placed the money in my hands at 4.5%, nearly 5 years ago." "When are you to pay?" "Half the 15th of this month, half the 15th of next." "Just so. And now here are 32,500 francs payable shortly. They are all signed by you, and assigned to our house by the holders." "I recognize them," said Morel, whose face was suffused as he thought that for the first time in his life he would be unable to honour his own signature. "Is this all?" "No. I have for the end of the month these bills which have been assigned to us by the house of Pascal and the house of Wilde and Turner of Marseille, amounting to nearly 55,000 francs in all, 287,500 francs. It is impossible to describe what Morel suffered during this enumeration. 287,500 francs, repeated he. Yes, sir, replied the Englishman. I will not, continued he after a moment's silence, conceal from you that while your probity and exactitude up to this moment are universally acknowledged, yet the report is current in Marseille that you are not able to meet your liabilities. At this almost brutal speech, Morel turned deathly pale. Sir, said he, up to this time, and it is now more than 24 years since I received the direction of this house from my father, who had himself conducted it for 35 years. Never has anything bearing the signature of Morel and Son been dishonored. I know that, replied the Englishman, but as a man of honor should answer another, tell me fairly, shall you pay these with the same punctuality? Morel shuddered and looked at the man, who spoke with more assurance than he had hitherto shown. "Two questions, frankly put," said he. "A straightforward answer should be given. Yes, I shall pay if, as I hope, my vessel arrives safely, for its arrival will again procure me the credit which the numerous accidents of which I have been the victim have deprived me. But if the Pharaon should be lost, and this last resource be gone—" The poor man's eyes filled with tears. "Well," said the other, "if this last resource fail you—" "Well," returned Morel, "it is a cruel thing to be forced to say, but already used to misfortune, I must habituate myself to shame. I fear I shall be forced to suspend payment." "Have you no friends who could assist you?" Morel smiled mournfully. "In business, sir," said he, "one has no friends, only correspondents." "It is true," murmured the Englishman. "Then you have but one hope." "But one." "The last?" "The last." "So that if this fail—" "I am ruined, completely ruined." "As I was on my way here, a vessel was coming into port." "I know it, sir. A young man, who still adheres to my fallen fortunes, passes a part of his time in a belvedere at the top of the house, in hopes of being the first to announce good news to me. He has informed me of the arrival of the ship." "And it is not yours?" "No. She is a Bordeaux vessel, La Gironde. She comes from India also, but she is not mine." "Perhaps she has spoken to the Pharaon and brings you some tidings of her." "Shall I tell you plainly one thing, sir? I'd dread almost as much to receive any tidings of my vessel as to remain in doubt. Uncertainty is still hope." Then in a low voice Morel added, "This delay is not natural. The Pharaon left Calcutta the 5th of February. She ought to have been here a month ago." "What is that?" said the Englishman. "What is the meaning of that noise?"
"Oh, oh!" cried Morel, turning pale. "What is it?"
A loud noise was heard on the stairs of people moving hastily and half-stifled sobs. Morel rose and advanced to the door, but his strength failed him, and he sank into a chair. The two men remained opposite one another, Morel trembling in every limb, the stranger gazing at him with an air of profound pity. The noise had ceased, but it seemed that Morel expected something. Something had occasioned the noise, and something must follow. The stranger had fancied he heard footsteps on the stairs, and that the footsteps, which were those of several persons, stopped at the door. A key was inserted in the lock of the first door, and the creaking of hinges was audible.
"There are only two persons who have the key to that door," murmured Morel. "Coquelin and Julie."
At this instant the second door opened, and the young girl, her eyes bathed with tears, appeared. Morel rose tremblingly, supporting himself by the arm of the chair. He would have spoken, but his voice failed him.
"Oh, father,"
said she, clasping her hands,
"forgive your child for being the bearer of evil tidings."
Morel again changed colour. Julie threw herself into his arms.
"Oh, father, father,"
murmured she.
"Courage." "The Pharaon has gone down, then?"
said Morel in a hoarse voice. The young girl did not speak, but she made an affirmative sign with her head, as she lay on her father's breast.
"And the crew?"
asked Morel.
"Saved," said the girl. "Saved by the crew of the vessel that has just entered the harbour."
Morel raised his two hands to heaven with an expression of resignation and sublime gratitude.
"Thanks, my God," said he. "At least thou strikest but me alone."
A tear moistened the eye of the phlegmatic Englishman.
Come in, said Morel, "for I presume you are all at the door."
Scarcely had he uttered these words the Madame Morel entered weeping bitterly. Emmanuel followed her, and in the antechamber were visible the rough faces of 7 or 8 half-naked sailors. At the sight of these men, the Englishman started and advanced a step, then restrained himself and retired into the farthest and most obscure corner of the apartment. Madame Morel sat down by her husband and took one of his hands in hers. Julie still lay with her head on his shoulder. Emmanuel stood in the centre of the chamber and seemed to form the link between Morel's family and the sailors at the door.
"How did this happen?" said Morel.
"Draw nearer, Penelon," said the young man,
"and tell us all about it."
An old seaman, bronzed by the tropical sun, advanced, twirling the remains of a tarpaulin between his hands.
"Good day, Monsieur Morel,"
said he, as if he had just quitted Marseille the previous evening and had just returned from Aix or Toulon.
"Good day, Penelon,"
returned Morel, who could not refrain from smiling through his tears.
"Where is the captain?"
"The captain, Monsieur Morel. He has stayed behind sick at Palma. But, please God, it won't be much, and you will see him in a few days, all alive and hearty."
"Well now, tell your story, Penelon."
Penelon rolled his quid in his cheek, placed his hand before his mouth, turned his head and sent a long jet of tobacco juice into the antechamber, advanced his foot, balanced himself, and began.
You see, Monsieur Morel," said he, "we were somewhere between Cape Blanc and Cape Boredar, sailing with a fair breeze, south-southwest after a week's calm, when Captain Gaumard comes up to me. I was at the helm, I should tell you, and says, 'Penelon, what do you think of those clouds coming up over there?' I was just then looking at them myself. What do I think, Captain? Why, I think they are rising faster than they have any business to do, and that they would not be so black if they didn't mean mischief." "That's my opinion too," said the captain, "and I'll take precautions accordingly. We are carrying too much canvas. Avast there, all hands! Take in the studding sails and stow the flying jib." It was time. The squall was on us, and the vessel began to heel. "Ah," said the captain, "we have still too much canvas set. All hands lower the mains." 5 minutes after, it was down, and we sailed under mizzen topsails and top-gallant sails. "Well, Penelon," said the captain, "what makes you shake your head?" "Why," I says, "I still think you've got too much on." "I think you're right," answered he. "We shall have a gale." "A gale?" "More than that, we shall have a tempest, or I don't know what's what." You could see the wind coming, like the dust at Montredon. Luckily, the captain understood his business. "Take in 2 reefs in the topsails," cried the captain. "Let go the bowlines, haul the brace. Lower the topgallant sails. Haul out the reef tackles on the yards." "That was not enough for those latitudes," said the Englishman. "I should have taken 4 reefs in the topsails and furled the spanker." His firm, sonorous, and unexpected voice made everyone start. Penelon put his hand over his eyes and then stared at the man who thus criticized the manoeuvres of his captain. "We did better than that, sir," said the old sailor respectfully. "We put the helm up to run before the tempest. 10 minutes after we struck our topsails and scudded under bare poles." "The vessel was very old to risk that," said the Englishman. "It was that did the business after pitching heavily for 12 hours. We sprung a leak." "Penelon," said the captain, "I think we are sinking. Give me the helm and go down into the hold." I gave him the helm and descended. There was already 3 feet of water. "All hands to the pumps," I shouted, but it was too late. and it seemed the more we pumped, the more came in. Ah, said I, after 4 hours' work, since we are sinking, let us sink. We can die but once. That's the example you set, Penelon, cries the captain. Very well, wait a minute. He went into his cabin and came back with a brace of pistols. I will blow the brains out of the first man who leaves the pump, said he.
Well done, said the Englishman.
There's nothing gives you so much courage as good reasons, continued the sailor. And during that time, the wind had abated, and the sea gone down. But the water kept rising, not much, only 2 inches an hour, but still it rose. 2 inches an hour does not seem much, but in 12 hours, that makes 2 feet, and 3 we had before, that makes 5. Come, said the captain, we have done all in our power, and Monsieur Morel will have nothing to reproach us with. We have tried to save the ship. Let us now save ourselves. To the boats, my lads, as quick as you can. Now, continued Penelon. You see, Monsieur Morel, a sailor is attached to his ship, but still more to his life. So we did not wait to be told twice. The more so that the ship was sinking under us and seemed to say, Get along, save yourselves. We soon launched the boat, and all 8 of us got into it. The captain descended last, or rather, he did not descend, he would not quit the vessel, so I took him round the waist and threw him into the boat, and then I jumped after him. It was time, for just as I jumped, the deck burst with a noise like the broadside of a man-of-war. 10 minutes after, she pitched forward, then the other way, spun round, and then goodbye to the Pharaon. As for us, we were 3 days without anything to eat or drink, so that we began to think of drawing lots. Who should feed the rest? When we saw La Gironde, we made signals of distress. She perceived us, made for us, and take us all on board. There now, Monsieur Morel, that's the whole truth on the honor of a sailor. Is not it true, you fellows there?
A general murmur of approbation showed that the narrator had faithfully detailed their misfortunes and sufferings.
Well, well, said Monsieur Morel, I know there was no time in fault but destiny. It was the will of God that this should happen. Blessed be his name. What wages are due to you?
Oh, don't let us talk of that, Monsieur Morel.
Yes, but we will talk of it.
Oh, well then, a 3 months, said Penelon.
Cocle, pay 200 francs to each of these good fellows, said Morel. At another time, added he, I should have said, give them besides 200 francs over as a present, but the times are changed, and the little money that remains to me is not my own.
Penelon turned to his companions and exchanged a few words with them.
As for that, Monsieur Morel, said he, again turning his quid, as for that.
As for what?
The money.
Well?
Well, we all say that 50 francs will be enough for us at present, and that we will wait for the rest.
Thanks, my friends, thanks, cried Monsieur Morel gratefully. Take it, and if you can find another employer, enter his service. You are free to do so.
These last words produced a prodigious effect on the seaman. Penelon nearly swallowed his quid. Fortunately, he recovered.
What? Monsieur Morel?
Said he in a low voice.
You send us away? You were then angry with us?
No, no, said Monsieur Morel. I am not angry, quite the contrary. And I do not send you away, but I have no more ships, and therefore I do not want any sailors.
No more ships?
Returned Penelon.
Well then, you'll build some. We'll wait for you.
I have no money to build ships with, Penelon, said the poor owner mournfully, so I cannot accept your kind offer.
No more money? Then you must not pay us. We can scud, like the Pharaoh under bare poles.
Enough, enough, cried Morel, almost overpowered. Leave me, I pray you. We shall meet again in a happier time. Emmanuel, go with them, and see that my orders are executed.
At least we shall see each other again, Monsieur Morel, asked Penelon.
Yes, I hope so, at least. No, go. He made a sign to Coquelin, who went first. The seaman followed him, and Emmanuel brought up the rear. Now, said the owner to his wife and daughter, leave me. I wish to speak with this gentleman. And he glanced towards the clerk of Thomson and French, who had remained motionless in the corner during this scene, in which he had taken no part, except the few words we have mentioned. The two women looked at this person, whose presence they had entirely forgotten, and retired, but as she left the apartment, Julie gave the stranger a supplicating glance, to which he replied by a smile that an indifferent spectator would have been surprised to see on his stern features. The two men were left alone.
Well, sir,
said Morel, sinking into a chair,
you have heard all, and I have nothing further to tell you.
I see, returned the Englishman, that a fresh and unmerited misfortune has overwhelmed you, and this only increases my desire to serve you.
Oh, sir,
cried Morel. Let me see, continued the stranger. I am one of your largest creditors.
Your bills at least are the first that will fall due.
Do you wish for time to pay?
A delay would save my honor, and consequently my life.
How long a delay do you wish for? Morel reflected.
2 months, said he.
I will give you 3, replied the stranger.
But,
asked Morel,
will the house of Thomson and French consent?
Oh, I take everything on myself. Today is the 5th of June.
Yes.
Well, renew these bills up to the 5th of September, and on the 5th of September at 11 o'clock, the hand of the clock pointed to 11, I shall come to receive the money.
I shall expect you,
returned Morel,
and I will pay you, or I shall be dead.
These last words were uttered in so low a tone that the stranger could not hear them. The bills were renewed, the old ones destroyed, and the poor shipowner found himself with 3 months before him to collect his resources. The Englishman received his thanks with the phlegm peculiar to his nation, and Morel, overwhelming him with grateful blessings, conducted him to the staircase. The stranger met Julie on the stairs. She pretended to be descending, but in reality she was waiting for him. "Oh, sir," she said, clasping her hands. "Mademoiselle," said the stranger, "one day you will receive a letter signed Sinbad the Sailor. Do exactly what the letter bids you, however strange it may appear." "Yes, sir," returned Julie. "Do you promise?" "I swear to you I will." "It is well. Adieu, mademoiselle. Continue to be the good, sweet girl you are at present, and I have great hopes that heaven will reward you by giving you Emmanuel for a husband." Julie uttered a faint cry, blushed like a rose, and leaned against the baluster. The stranger waved his hand and continued to descend. In the court he found Penelon, who, with a rouleau of 100 francs in either hand, seemed unable to make up his mind to retain them. "Come with me, my friend," said the Englishman. "I wish to speak to you." End of chapter 29.